welcome you to my class on Preface to Shakespeare. Now, in the previous class, I discussed the merits of Shakespeare, as explained by Samuel Johnson, and just a brief recap of the previous class. According to Johnson, Shakespeare portrayed nature from a realistic point of view. So there was no exaggeration in Shakespeare's depiction or portrayal of nature. So that was, according to Samuel Johnson, one of Shakespeare's, merits. Secondly, Johnson also emphasized on Shakespeare's, again, realistic portrayal of love. Shakespeare did not overemphasize love. Shakespeare considered other passions and emotions of human beings as inevitable part of existence. What Samuel Johnson observed in other playwrights that they overemphasized love, and this passion got more, recognition and more claimed more importance from the writers, whether they were, playwrights or poets. Now, from this point of view, Shakespeare was also exceptional, and Johnson praised him for not giving emphasis on a particular passion and ignoring other passions. Shakespeare didn't do that. Moreover, Johnson also praised Shakespeare's art of characterization, and what he showed that Shakespeare's characters are individuals, but at the same time they represent larger community. That means Macbeth is individual, but Macbeth represents many human beings or many people across the world. Similar is the case with King Lear, Othello, and Hamlet, and other protagonists of Shakespeare's plays. So all the protagonists of Shakespeare's plays, they are individual characters, but they represent the larger community as well. So what happens in the dramas of other playwrights, that their protagonists are almost same in all the dramas. So Shakespeare made a kind of variation, but this variation is again realistic and true. A reflection of life was also genuine in Shakespeare's plays. So these are the major merits of Shakespeare according to Samuel Johnson. So that's exactly what we discussed in my previous class. But before that class, I also explained other things. I'm not going to recap all these things. If you feel the necessity, you can go back to those classes and do those classes first and then come to this one. In today's class, I want to start with the objections of some critics against Shakespeare before Johnson wrote this essay. So even Shakespeare was criticized within 100 years of his death. And what were the objections, and how did Samuel Johnson refute or defend those objections? He did not defend all the objections, but he defended many of the objections. And what are the objections? Let's see. And let's also see how Samuel Johnson defended Shakespeare. Shakespeare's emphasis on general human nature has invited censor and hostility from some critics. Shakespeare was that type of playwright who, instead of giving emphasis on the status of a man, rather emphasized the nature of human beings. His protagonists came of royal families, it's true, but the royal characters, they behaved like human beings. You know what I said in my previous discussions, that introducing common human beings as protagonists is a modern phenomenon. And the Elizabethan dramatists or playwrights, they also maintained the Aristotelian style of selecting protagonists from upper class people. And Shakespeare was no, exception. He also, his Hamlet, his Macbeth, his King Lear, his Othello, And all other characters, the protagonists, they also came of royal families or significant social background. So they were exceptional personalities. So uh, when they are exceptional personalities, there may be a misconception that their nature would have been completely different from common human beings, but Shakespeare didn't do that. Shakespeare's kings are also human beings. Shakespeare's princess and Shakespeare's dukes, duchess, they are not simply dukes and duchess, they are also human beings. So it is human nature that Shakespeare was interested to explore. And that's exactly what we will see in Shakespeare's plays. So, Dennis and Reimer, they are two critics. They complain that Shakespeare's romans are not sufficiently Roman. Rome is a city now of Italy, but there was a Roman Empire. So earlier it was Roman Empire. So when Shakespeare dealt with Roman characters or Romans, you know, according to Dennis and Reimer, those Romans did not share the traditional qualities the Romans were supposed to possess or were professed to possess rather, or were said to possess. Voltaire's protest is that his kings are not kingly in the strict sense. And not only that, Voltaire also, you know, complained that Shakespeare's kings don't behave like kings, they behave like common human beings. So that is the allegation against Shakespeare, that his kings behave like human beings, his duchess, his dukes, his princess, they behave like human beings, common human beings. That one of them, Claudius in Hamlet, so Voltaire said that Claudius in Hamlet, Claudius is the antagonist in Hamlet, is depicted as a drunkard. So Claudius was shown as a drunkard. He became the king of Denmark later, I mean, after his brother's death, old Hamlet's death. Claudius became the king of Denmark. And Claudius has been depicted or portrayed as a drunkard. So a king should not be depicted as a drunkard, according to Voltaire, because it can create a kind of confusion among the audience that they might start thinking that, well, a king is drinking. So, as if a king is someone, God, who cannot make any mistake. But what we see that Shakespeare is a realistic, dramatist. He was a realistic playwright, and that's why his kings shared those weaknesses, those flaws that common human beings also share. In reality, Shakespeare assigns nature as a prominent role and gives less room to accidental features. So, what Shakespeare loved, he did not want to, fabricate falsehood. He rather wanted to trust on reality, wanted to trust the real human nature. He wanted to portray and explain the real human nature in his drama. His story or plot may demand romance or kings, but what Shakespeare thinks about is the human element in them. So, the kind of plot with which Shakespeare dealt in his plays, that play might demand, kings, uh, princes, dukes, and other important personalities of the society. But it doesn't mean that while dealing with those significant characters, they will not be shown as sharing some flaws or faults in their characters. It's nothing like that. Shakespeare believed that even the great people might have, shared some flaws or shared some weaknesses. Romans and kings are essentially human beings, so that's very important. The Romans, they are human beings. The kings are also human beings. The important personalities, the powerful, the personalities in the society, they are also human beings. What befalls all human beings may befall them too. So, even if they are kings, even if they are dukes or duchesses, uh, don't they sleep? Don't they eat? Don't they have passions like common human beings? Obviously, they have. So, if danger befalls on someone, danger may befall on them. If any passion, baffles a person, I mean a common person, that same passion can baffle a king. A usurper and murderer like Claudius can certainly be a lover of wine. So Claudius is a murderer, he murdered his elder brother. And he also devised the plan to kill, Hamlet as well. Junior Hamlet or Prince Hamlet. And a murderer may drink, so it's not an exception. So why should not Shakespeare show Claudius as a drunkard? Buffon may well be picked from among Roman senators. These objections of the critics on this issue merely proves their petty-mindedness. So, another Roman character. So, that these characters, whether they are Romans or whether they are kings, they may share some weaknesses in their character. And they are human beings. So, Shakespeare did not refrain himself from reality. He portrayed reality. So these were the allegations against Shakespeare. This was the allegation, one of the allegations, that Shakespeare's romance and Shakespeare's kings are not kings or romance like a real life situation, but what Johnson says that they are more realistic. Shakespeare's portrayal of romance or kings is more realistic because Shakespeare did not leave any space for doubt. They are human beings. Above all, they are human beings, whether they are kings or Romans. Mixture of tragic and comic elements and defended. This is very significant. That even if you look at Aristotelian plays, you will see that if there is a tragedy, then it is completely tragic. If there is a comedy, then it is completely comic. Now, if you look at Oedipus Rex or King Oedipus or Agamemnon or Alcestis, or Antigone, so I'm just giving the examples of famous Greek plays or Aristotelian plays. Greek plays written um, at the time or before the time of Aristotle. So in these Greek plays, what we observe are Aristophanes' frogs. So in these Greek plays, what we observe that when there is a tragedy, it's completely tragic. There is no comic element in that tragedy. And when it's a comedy, Aristophanes' Frogs, it can be termed as a comedy. It can also be termed as a farce. Some critics also term Frogs as a farce. And if you look at those, dramas or plays, you will notice one thing, that a comedy never shares any tragic element, and a tragedy never shares any comic element. But Shakespeare introduced a new type of drama which contained both tragic and comic elements. And he was, accused of violating the norms of writing drama. And he violated, obviously, the Aristotelian style of writing drama. And he was, of course, criticized by people, the critics, contemporary critics and critics who came later. So, how did Johnson look at this, violation of the norms of writing drama? Let's see. Another allegation leveled against Shakespeare is that he was careless enough to mix tragedy and comedy in the same play. So, the Aristotelian playwrights, when they wrote tragedy, they wanted to emphasize on the, catastrophe, hamartia, tragic flaw, and all these things become the tragic ending, and they become very important and giving no space, no room for any comic element. But Shakespeare mingled both tragic and comic elements in some of his plays, not in all plays. But even in some of the tragedies, there may be some comic scenes as well. If not plenty, but there are some comic scenes. You will see some comic episodes or scenes even in Macbeth. And uh, why Shakespeare introduced these scenes, it demands, our explanation. It demands our concentration. Johnson takes this point for a detailed consideration. Johnson agrees that in the strictest sense, Shakespeare's plays are neither comedies nor tragedies or tragedies. So they are compositions of a distinct kind which show the real state of nature. Life is an ebb and flow of sorrow and happiness. Hence, a portrait of life should consist of both. Such an uh, intermingled expression, life is unexceptionable. The loss of one is the gain of another. So, Samuel Johnson defends Shakespeare, saying that Shakespeare's tragedies or comedies, whatever you tell them, Shakespeare's tragedies like Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, Othello, they are great tragedies. And on the other hand, Midsummer Night's Dream, uh, comedy of errors. These are the 10 best. They are termed as comedies. There are many other comedies as well, as you like it. I forgot to tell you. So they are comedies, but even in the comedies, there are some, not if not fully tragic, but partially there are some tragic elements. There are some misunderstandings. Even in As You Like It, you will see some villainies, you will see some plots, devising some plots, and these plots were devised to destroy people as well. So if not fully tragic, but partial tragic elements or uh, tragic tone or tragic, you can say, atmosphere sometimes prevails in those plays. So a tragedy sometimes contains some comic elements in Shakespeare's plays, and some comedies also contain. If you look at As You Like It, you will see that Duke Senior and Duke Frederick. There was a kind of conflict between the two brothers. And what happened that Duke Frederick usurped the throne and he exiled his brother. He made his brother to go on exile. And similarly, Orlando was also banished from the state, almost banished from the state by his brother Oliver. So the misunderstanding, the kind of villainy we see in the play, and not only that, Oliver also devised a plot to murder his younger brother. So these are obviously part of tragic elements. And if you look at Macbeth, you will see there is a drunkard scene as well in Macbeth's palace, and that also evokes a kind of, merriment or a kind of laughter among the audience. So even if you look at Hamlet, sometimes the behavior may appear to be, if not fully comic, partially comic. So Shakespeare left the space for comic elements even in tragedy. What we say sometimes, comic relief. In Shakespeare's plays, sometimes when we see some scenes, I mean comic scenes, the critics term these scenes as comic relief. These incidents, these episodes are termed as comic relief. And similar is the case with comedy as well. I have already said that. And not only that, look at Midsummer Night's Dream. The love affair, the fascination shifts from one girl to another. So there is a love juice. If you have read, Midsummer Night's Dream, then you will understand. So there is a juice, which is poured on ice. When it's poured on ice, the first object you will see after opening your eyes, you will fall in love. So whether the object is a person or an animal or anything else, so it's purely romantic love, and because of this, uh, style or this charm of the medicine or the juice, we see that there is a misunderstanding among the lovers. So even the comedy, even if you look at the Tempest, you will see a kind of villainy, a kind of usurpation over there as well. But still, it's dominated by some comic, sense. So what I want to make clear that even if in Shakespeare's tragedies there are comic elements, and even if in Shakespeare's comedies there are some tragic elements, and Samuel Johnson is defending Shakespeare for giving space to comic elements in tragedies and giving space to tragic elements in comedies. Why? because he thought, and Johnson also thought that life is not a combination of absolute happiness or absolute, sorrow. It's a combination of happiness and sorrow. So it's a combination of tragic and comic elements. So life cannot be fully or absolutely tragic. It cannot be absolutely comic. If someone shows or projects life simply as an embodiment of comic elements alone, then this is unrealistic. That type of life doesn't exist in this world. So if life is also shown as an embodiment of tragic elements alone, it is also unrealistic because there are also some positive or optimistic elements in life as well. So Shakespeare did it. And if I give the example of, the Merchant of Venice, a beautiful example of the mingling of both comic and tragic elements, if you read, you have it in your syllabus. So if you read The Merchant of Venice, you will notice one thing, that there are some tragic elements and there are some comic elements as well. So what is tragic for Shylock is comic for Antonio and Bassanio and Portia. So what is tragic for Antonio, Bassanio and Portia is comic for Shylock as well. So the play ends in such a way that the play is, the ending is comic for some people and tragic for some people as well. So that's how a play can also end, because life is the combination of both tragic and comic elements. So that's how, Samuel Johnson defended Shakespeare. Shakespeare was, accused of violating the norms, I said, style of writing plays, writing dramas. So that's how Johnson defends Shakespeare. Ancient poets used select crimes and foolishness, vicissitudes and lighter incidents, guilts of distress and joys of prosperity, and modify them in several their plays. It must have been thus that tragedy comedy arose, but it comes to our particular attention that no single Roman author has attempted depicting both these aspects either in separate plays or in the same composition. Very interesting. We also noticed one thing. A writer or a playwright who used to write tragedy, he continued writing tragedy throughout his life. A playwright who used to write comedies, he continued writing comedies throughout his life. Even a tragedy writer would never write comedies. Even a comedy writer would never write tragedies. And it was, let alone giving space to both tragic and comic elements in a single play. So it was untraditional. What Shakespeare did was quite untraditional. Shakespeare's genius is proved in his power to give rise to joy and sorrow through the same play. So it was untraditional, it was unique, it was new, giving both or keeping both comic and tragic elements in the same play. The critics, complain that, by displaying some comic elements in the tragedy, Shakespeare also destroyed the pathos. Shakespeare also destroyed the climax. Shakespeare also destroyed the tragic atmosphere which was created in the earlier acts and scenes. So Johnson doesn't think so. He disagrees with those critics, saying that it's Shakespeare's one of the strongest areas of allowing both tragic and comic elements in the same play. Almost all his plays have serious as well as absurd characters. So if you look at Shakespeare's portrayal of characters or Shakespeare's art of characterization, you will see some of the characters, they are very, very realistic. They are very, not only realistic, they are very serious. And some characters you will see absurd characters. So don't you think that our society is also a combination of serious and absurd personalities? Obviously. Our society is a combination of both serious and absurd personalities. There are absurd characters among us, and thus sometimes cause seriousness and sorrow, and sometimes levity and laughter. So sometimes we see in our society, in our real life situation, we are full of joy and sometimes full of sorrow. So we cannot claim that our life is completely or absolutely, full of pleasures or absolutely full of sorrow. So that was another part. Now we are going to another point. nature a higher court of appeal than rules of criticism. From the point of view of the rules of dramatic writing, Shakespeare's mingling of the tragic and the comic may be considered unfavorable. But the rules are less important than the claims of realism. Excellent, approach by Samuel Johnson. I said that Shakespeare violated the rules. It was the traditional rule. It was the traditional format or form of writing dramas, that when you write a tragedy, don't leave room for comic elements, and when you write a comedy, don't leave room for tragic elements. But Shakespeare violated the norm. Shakespeare violated the rule. Why? For the sake of realism. Because I have already explained that Shakespeare thought that life is a combination of both sorrow and joy. There is always room for appealing from criticism to nature. The aim of poetry is to please and instruct, and we may justify the drama which mingles the comic and the tragic because it achieves this aim better than pure drama. So, what does Johnson indicate by pure drama? He indicates or he emphasizes pure drama, pure tragedy, or a pure comedy. We can refer to the Aristotelian tragedies or Aristotelian comedies. I have already discussed what is a pure tragedy and what is a pure comedy. So Shakespeare didn't do that. Shakespeare, since according to Johnson, Shakespeare was a realistic writer. So that's why he violated the tradition, he violated the norms and style of writing drama for the sake of reality, because he placed reality above, style. For it is closer to reality. Nor are critics justified in alleging that such mingling results in the suspension of passions and interruption in their progress, so that the principal event, loses the power of moving the hearts of the spectators. You know, there's a spelling mistake. It's not principle, it's principle. So, what I was saying, that Johnson thinks even the mingling of two elements don't destroy the principal event. The principal event doesn't lose the power of moving the hearts of the spectators. If it's a tragedy, despite being accommodating, comic elements, the tragedy of Shakespeare is successful to arouse pity and fear. I repeat that despite sharing some comic elements, the tragedies of Shakespeare are sure to arouse pity and fear among the audience. And similar is the case with comedies. The comedies are also sure to arouse laughter or smile. It doesn't mean that you have to laugh all the time in a comedy. There can be a soothing feeling within you, as we see in As You Like It. It's not simply laughter with which the play ends. It's a kind of change. It's a kind of transformation. It's a kind of regeneration for some characters with which the play ends. So it doesn't mean that a comedy has to be full of laughter, has to be full of merriment. And the ending is important. The ending is something that indicates that it's a comedy. The mingling of tragic and comic scenes succeeds in enhancing the intensity of passions. In any case, mingled drama can give greater pleasure because pleasure consists in variety. So, not only that, a drama that mingles both tragic and comic elements can be more interesting because it focuses on, reality. So, uh, Shakespeare's classification of Shakespeare's plays, artificial. So before going to this, these are the weaknesses of Shakespeare. But apart from the merits and demerits that Johnson says by pointing out, there are some paragraphs in Johnson's, essay in which he doesn't say whether it's Shakespeare's strength or weakness, but we, the readers, understand that what does he want to mean. So this is one of those points. If we explain this point, then we will understand whether he's going to emphasize Shakespeare's fault or Shakespeare's strength. Besides any rigorous differentiation, between tragedy and comedy, hardly existed in the time of Shakespeare, when any play which had a denouncement providing happiness for its chief characters was regarded as a comedy, and any play which had a catastrophe depicting death or disaster of the chief character was labeled as a tragedy. So comedy was supposed to give a happiness for its chief characters, main characters, and uh, you know that a tragedy would end in let's correct this spelling also. A tragedy, as I have already said, that ends with the death of the major characters, or with the tragic ending or catastrophe of the major characters. That was the tradition. So comedy of Shakespeare, classification of Shakespeare's plays artificial. I mean, uh, if you classify Shakespeare's plays like tragedies, comedies, history plays, tragicomedies, Johnson is probably going to say that this division is artificial. A history play was believed to be one which depicted a series of actions in a chronological order. It was not always clearly distinguished from tragedy. In any of these modes, Shakespeare can be seen to have interchanged senses of seriousness and happiness. This soothes the mind on one hand and exalts it on the other. Let's read it fully. Shakespeare always succeeds in achieving his purpose, whether it is to gladden or to depress, to carry on with the story without vehemence or emotion. He makes us laugh or mourn, to keep silent in quiet expectation, tranquil but not indifferent. Once we come to grasp Shakespeare's plan in a particular play, much of the criticism of Rhymer and Voltaire loses its validity. Hamlet opens without any impropriety with a dialogue between two sentinels. In Othello, Iago's shouting at Brabantio's window in the first act does not harm the scheme of the play, although his phraseology may be too vulgar for a modern spectator. There is no gross impropriety either in the character of Polonius or in the gravedigger's conversation. So, what Johnson wants to say over here, that classification of Shakespeare's plays artificial, that if we classify Shakespeare's plays like tragedies, comedies, tragicomedies, and history plays, then it's going to be an injustice to Shakespeare, because it's better to term his plays as plays, because there are some historical plays in which he twisted the character of the protagonist. And that in a historical play, the incidents are shown in a chronological manner, and you have to maintain every historical details minutely. But Shakespeare didn't do that. So why he didn't do that? Because look at these sentences, that Shakespeare sometimes wanted the audience to laugh, and the audience laughed. He sometimes wanted to make the audience mourn, the audience mourned. Sometimes he wanted his audience to stay silent, they stayed silent. So whatever he did, whatever he wanted to do, he became successful to do that. And not only that, remember one thing, that the when Hamlet opens, we see that it opens in an atmosphere which doesn't completely give you that what's going to happen. So it's an atmosphere, which is realistic, which is normal, which is natural. In in Othello's, in Othello, Iago's shouting and Brabantio's window in first act does not harm the scheme of the play. What we see in Othello as well, we also notice one thing, that even it's a tragedy, we don't see that Shakespeare completely focuses on the tragic elements all the time. He shows life. Shakespeare shows life. Shakespeare shows nature. So, from realistic point of view. So, the division or the classification of Shakespeare's plays, if I say, or if we say, according to Johnson, it's not my opinion, that it's a tragedy, then it can be a partial analysis of Shakespearean play. If I say it's a comedy, again it's going to be a partial analysis or uh, point of view. If I say it's a historical play, then it's going to be partial, judgment. And that's why Johnson is saying that the division of Shakespearean plays is partial. So, what Johnson thinks that Shakespeare's natural affinity for comedy. So, I think that though it's not included either as Shakespeare's strength or Shakespeare's weakness, but since this is something exceptional that Johnson says, because so far what we have noticed among the judgment of other critics, Shakespeare's tragedies are always highlighted, and the tragedies are ranked above comedies. But Johnson is going to say that comedies by Shakespeare should be ranked above tragedies. So this is quite, opposite to our known analysis about Shakespeare's plays. So that's why I am not going to start this point now in today's class. I want to start this in my next class when I will discuss Shakespeare's weakness, obviously according to Samuel Johnson. So thank you very much for today's class, and I hope that you will attend the next class as well. Thank you.